everyone. Let me follow Dunbar's lead and come out into the pits here. I mean, Dunbar's always been a populist, and he really wants the audience to be around him. So welcome to the second in our series of this second semester of SWOP breakfasts. We've got Dunbar Moodie presenting on manhood, mining, migrancy. That's continuing the theme of gender and masculinities that we are looking at in this semester. Now Dunbar, I mean, you all know him very well. He's a visiting professor at SWOP and has been for the last 3 years, and is really one of the most knowledgeable people on labor in the mining industry. And he's working currently on a book that's a much awaited history of the NUM. So we're looking forward to that, and this is really to give you a bit of a taste of his current thinking. So over to you, Dunbar.
Okay, folks, if you're right at the back there and you can't hear me, you can always walk. Come closer. I much prefer to. What I really want is a blackboard. You can tell how old I am. Auguste Comte, the supposed founder of sociology, he certainly invented the term, is reported to have said that he practiced mental hygiene. He read only his own work. I'm actually going to be speaking out of my book, Going for Gold. Those of you who've read it will recognize a lot of what I have to say, because that's what I know as much as anything about gender. But I'll try and make it a little more casual than the rather tightly argued stuff in the book. Let me start off by saying that in 1981, by 1981, I had decided that I was going to study mine workers. I was at ISCR in Grahamstown and taking the train back to the National Archives and digging away as hard as I could go. Also conducting a study of town women in the Velcom area. And my wife was doing research for her PhD. She's Meredith Aldrich. It's a Wits PhD, you can find it. At any rate, it was about close relationships. And her assistant was a woman called Vivian Endache. Vivian collected 100 life histories from the people living in what was called the Tengu village, in 5 different age grades, looking at how close relationships changed over time, and my wife collected 100 from white Gravestonians in the same categories. And when one of the trips I came back, I was asked by the Black Sash to give them a little talk about migrant labour, and Vivian came. And afterwards she said to me, "Dunbar, can't I do some life history of mine workers? My father was a mine worker." She was on her way back. She's a domestic servant in Durban. She was on her way back to her work, but on the way she said, "I'll stay in Mantaneni and interview." So I had a bit of grant money left over, and I said, "Sure." And she said, "Well, how many?" So I worked out more or less what I could afford, and I said 40. You can get 40 from me, anything up to 40. My Lord. 6 weeks later, 40 life histories show up in the mail. And 15 of them dealt with this question of men being the wives of other men on the mines. It was extraordinary. I mean, I'd given her instructions to look for things like strikes and work organization and all this kind of stuff. And these stories came of these guys who were who doubled their take-home pay. by being wives. I must say I didn't quite know what to do with it. I was a little embarrassed by it, to be quite honest. Anyway, I mean, I'm not going to talk about that unless you want to ask questions afterwards. I can certainly expand on that question. But what began was a process of conscientization for me. That was definitely furthered by the fact that I was teaching at Hobart William Smith colleges. Hobart William Smith, Hobart College for Men, William Smith for Women, coordinate colleges, 2 student governments, the common faculty, common lectures, and a very, very heavily feminist dean of William Smith, and a very gender-conscious faculty. Barry Saving, who essentially invented feminist theology, was there. So I got pitched into the middle of this, and suddenly I realized, and along with these stories that Vivian had collected, I realized I wasn't just doing research on mine workers, I was doing research on men. They were all men. And gender is not just a woman's issue. Years later, I did gender workshops at the Department of Peacekeeping Operations at the UN, and you could see the surprise on their faces when I said gender has to do with men. So I'm going to talk try and talk about what manhood meant to the guys who were working on the mines. In 1984, do you think I need it? Do you hear me at the back there, but under the mic? It's okay. It's my father used to call his parade ground voice. On our way down to Matlaneni, sitting with Vivian, I said to her, Vivian, is there a word in Xhosa for masculinity, for manhood? Oh, yes, she says. Ubudoda. And so from then on, we interviewed maybe 20, particular trip, we maybe interviewed 20 people. I asked all of them, what does it mean to have Ubudoda? What does Ubudoda mean? And without exception, these guys, now these were guys who'd worked on the mines in the 40s, 50s, and 60s, who are now retired. Without exception, they said, Ubudoda is taking care of your umzi, your homestead. Ubudoda is ruling justly over your homestead. Ubudoda is taking care of your neighbors, lending your oxen when your neighbors need to plow. Ubudoda is carrying out the imitator of the community. And I tried, my first thought was, look, these guys are in Pondo, right? They're famous they used to say, the Pondo's on the bridge, you get off. They're famous for being the most belligerent workers on the mines. But for them, manhood. I said, well, what about fighting? Because for us, for me, fighting is an important part, right? Being able to stand up for yourself. I went to Weinberg Boys Primary School. There was no question that manhood involved either bullying or being bullied. No, I said, that's killing. That's different. Manhood is this kind of moral thing. This business of being at home and taking care of other people. This particular question, I was also at the same time interviewing people in Lesotho, and when I asked them the question there, I don't even remember what the word was for manhood in Sesotho. But when I asked them the question, they said, no. manhood is something that happens when you reach a certain age and then you go out with the other men into the countryside and you're isolated for a while. And they talk about circumcision. It was a shortcut, as it were, which meant that you couldn't really get discussions about the moral aspects of manhood. Although Somabile assures me that that's in fact what the circumcision ceremonies are about. That it's much more than just about snipping. It's also about learning how you should behave, learning about manhood, basically. Anyway, we worked with the guys from Pondoland because in Pondo no circumcised. So they had to tell me the moral story. Right? Anybody who circumcises just says they're a little embarrassed and they say no. It's... So okay. Fighting was not part of it. Fighting was something else. You went to fight when you went to the mines, but you didn't go to the mines to fight. And when you fought, you weren't fighting in a way to express your manhood. Work was much more important, in fact, for manhood, because work was earning money in order to support the Umzi. Okay, in the course of that particular expedition, that 1984 trip, I still don't know why. A question came out from me to one of the older men. I said, can a woman have manhood? Can a woman have ubudor? You know, every single, with one exception of a very old guy who'd started work on the mines in the 1920s, they all said yes. A woman can have ubudor. A woman can have manhood. And I said, really? And they said, oh yes, when we're on the mines and our wives are taking care of the Umzi and are organizing to help with the neighbors and so on and so forth, then they have ubudorda. Of course, the implication is pretty clear. When the guy comes back, the women lose their ubudorda. But the term was flexible enough for them to be able to talk about women with manhood. Ultimately, the argument that I make is that when you come down to it deeply, manhood is a form of integrity. It's being true to who you are. It's being true to who you are within particular sorts of contexts and particular sorts of positions. And the primary, at the time, by 1984, the older men were still talking about manhood in terms of what I call resistance to proletarianization. The primary factor, the most important thing. The guys went to the mines and they watched out for each other. If somebody went kuchipa, if somebody disappeared and seemed to be getting involved with a town woman, then they would go and find him. Because what you had to be focused on, what you had to be committed to, was your homestead, your Umzi. That's why you were there. The Mpondo were famously stingy. They sent most of the money home. Because the center of being a man was coming to the mines. A lot of them talked of it like going to war or going to herd cattle. Being a man was to work in order to build up the Umzi. And the original word for working for the whites in Xhosa is pangela. And pangela means take. So they were expressing their manhood by going to the mines to work for their homesteads. I had a couple more research trips the next time around, 1988 I think it was. I talked to young men who were still working on the mines. I asked them, can a woman have manhood? They looked at me as though I was slightly nuts. Of course not. It was like it was a meaningless, silly question. Manhood had by then become more sort of biological. I mean, I really learned this when I went to a book launch. I think it was Alistair Sparks' book, The Mind of South Africa, years and years ago at Duke University. A whole lot of guests, and we all got in a bus to go to the big reception afterwards. And I was sitting between a guy, I seem to remember his name was Prince, and a woman who was one of the committee, one of the Soweto Committee of 10, something like that. And so I'm sitting between these two Xhosa-speaking people, so I thought, I'll try my Ubudorda question. So I say to the woman, can a woman have Ubudorda? Prince, the guy on the other side, was absolutely shocked.